since we're talking about the census, I want to bring in Matthew, since you know about the census. Can you talk about the 2020 census and some of the challenges that are there?
Yeah, I probably know too much about the census. Well, yeah, there's a lot of concern about 2020 at a lot of different levels. And if you've been following the news just the past few days, there's a couple of things that are concerning. First of all, the Urban Institute just released a report, I believe it was late last week, that suggested that there was a sizable undercount of non-white individuals. And we really won't have a better sense of the magnitude of the undercount until the Census Bureau completes something called the post-enumeration survey. But the simulation that the Urban Institute did was concerning. I've seen a couple of other attempts to model the undercount, and there nothing. It doesn't look good anywhere. And in Indian country, you know, right in the middle of the census, we were in the middle of the pandemic. The Navajo reservation was hit really hard, really early. When the federal government shut the census down because of the shelter-in-place orders, the Navajo, the census office covering the Navajo Nation, was the last to reopen. So there were problems there. There were some reservations that closed their borders to outsiders, and so that made taking the census problematic. And I could just go on and on with all the potential areas where the count may have been compromised. And then the other issue, and this is one that's just now beginning to get a little bit of attention, it involves something called the disclosure avoidance system, which the Census Bureau is just introducing for the preservation of confidentiality in their data. That's a well-intentioned effort, but some of the results that are coming out from the 2020 count, and particularly now in the redistricting files, shows that the data really are highly distorted for small populations and small places. So much so that the state of Alabama went into court a few months ago to block the Bureau from using this methodology. And the where they landed in the court decision was that the Census Bureau has to periodically brief officials from the state of Alabama about the impact of the disclosure avoidance system on the data. National Congress of American Indians has been looking at this very carefully, and lo and behold, we see that some reservations have higher than expected counts. Other reservations have lower than expected counts, and the Bureau will say, well, they all averaged out in the end. But when you're looking at those numbers for the purpose of formula funding for the CARES Act, as just mentioned, that's a significant problem. And so the Bureau continues to work on this, but people keep turning up. Neighborhoods with single family houses, lots of kids and no adults. And so it's very, very concerning. And I think everyone in Indian country ought to be paying attention to this issue to a much greater extent than they have been.
No, thank you for that. And I know we just touched on it earlier too. So if any of the panelists want to, could you talk about at least what sovereignty means in the context of data and research? What is data sovereignty and what does that look like?
Jordan, is it okay if I jump in real quick and
sure, go for it.
Point as well, which I think is super interesting and important. A lot of people say, well, if you have an overcount and you have too many people on, American Indians, well, that's not a bad thing. That's a great thing. It's actually not, because so undercounts are problematic because allocation of resources you've got left, but also on an overcount, it's also problematic because those are the same numbers. Those are the denominators used in public health at the CDC. So incidence of COVID-19, for instance, will be, sort of 10 out of 10 or whatever, if you have a larger number, it'll make the incidence look smaller, perhaps, right? So these numbers matter whether you're talking about an overcount or an undercount, because these numbers are used in all aspects of calculation of public health data, allocation of funds, and resources. So it's not as if it's one side is better than the other in overcounts.